we've got the whole crew together as we cover Ohio State with our instant analysis from Ohio State.
There's something that doesn't feel right.
Unbelievable effort from him today. Is E.J. Liddell going to crack the first team All Big Ten?
I think he can be the guy. I'm not trying to start a quarterback controversy.
He seems to have the durability. He certainly has the toughness. This is the question on a lot of people's minds here. Welcome to Buckeye Breakdown. Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to Buckeye Breakdown, our instant analysis post-game show after a game that had Ohio State fans feeling a whole bunch of different emotions throughout the course of the night. I'm Brendan Gulick, along with Andrew Lind. I'll tell you what, it's at the end of the day, it's a victory. That's most important. The Buckeyes start the year with a 21-10 win. Man, stream of consciousness, there are so many thoughts that come to my mind at the moment. The offense didn't look great, but when they needed it, they clearly could lean on it. They ran the ball effectively down the stretch of the game. But gosh, if we don't start by talking about the defense, then we're not doing anybody justice, because that was about as good a defensive performance as we've seen from Ohio State against any opponent anytime since the 2019 season. I don't care what the point total was that they gave up. That defense stepped up in a huge way.
Well, then it was kind of crazy to hear Jim Knowles, standing behind us speak and say that was really just their basic defense. I mean, they only, they held Notre Dame scoreless in the second half, 72 total yards in the second half. So, for them to only be in their basic defense like that's something, pretty crazy. So it'll be interesting to see what it's like in a couple weeks, when he continues to install things, or when they go up against more complex offenses or something like that. So really, yeah, I mean, that was really the storyline. It was something that we've been looking forward to for 8-9 months now. And then, for them to go out there and put that on the field, that's great.
The stars were shining brightly on Ohio State tonight and at Ohio State tonight. Anybody who was anybody that had something to do with Ohio State football was probably here, and a whole lot of people that were marginally connected to the program showed up as well. LeBron James, the big hero of the night for sure. Pregame, before we talk maybe about the game itself, you made a great point before the game about why this feels like such a good time for Ohio State to be scheduling a legit opponent early in the year.
Yeah, I mean, I think that just the fact that the NFL doesn't start for another week, you can bring back the 50-plus, former players who are in the NFL and have them here. And, I mentioned to you too, they have Dylan Raiola here. He can go and hang out with Justin Fields. They have Mark Fletcher here. He can go out hang out with Ezekiel Elliott and so forth, so on and so forth. And, I think that that's just something that they should consider moving forward. Obviously you'd have to get like a home and home with somebody, but every, 2 years, it might be worth having that very first game be against a premier opponent, and then, bring everybody back for that.
And all of those guys at some point went and hung with LeBron. And if I'm Dylan Raiola and I got a chance to go watch a Buckeyes game in person, thinking about, hey, this is my spot. I love everything about Ohio State, and I'm standing with King James on the sideline. Yeah. It's a recruiting pitch that nobody else has.
Yeah, and I think that, that's just kind of an intriguing aspect of it too, with the fact that, he's kind of said, hey, I would have come to Ohio State had I went to college, and then his son too was here, because Ohio State's, recruiting him. And, if he comes too, like that'll just, bring more awareness to the Buckeyes basketball program. And I mean, it's really just a relationship that it's smart of them to embrace.
So the Ohio State Buckeye defense was the star of the night. And I don't know if there was maybe any one guy in particular that jumped off the page, but there were a few guys that I thought really impressed. Mike Hall played as well as I could have ever imagined him to play tonight. The jump he took from last year to this year, just based on one performance, off the charts, because he just wasn't the kind of guy last year that showed that he had that capability. And today he was a wrecking ball in the middle of the line.
Yeah, and Jim Knowles called him disruptive, which, I mean, that was a really good description of what he was today. And I think that, just kind of having that year in the program to get his body right and get his mind right then led to this, this performance today. And if you think about it, like if he's coming in and he's a redshirt freshman starting over, you got Teron Vincent in the middle, Jerron Cage, those kind of things. Like if him and Tyleik Williams are able to step up and create kind of that 1-2 punch, like the Buckeyes aren't going to be able to be run on, up the middle.
I don't want to get like deep into X's and O's, because I don't think that's the purpose of our instant reaction after wrapping up the press conference tonight. But it was immediately obvious how different looking the defense was, considering that so much of the personnel was the same from a year ago. The most noticeable difference is basically the position that Jack Sawyer was playing. He was often in a 2-point stance. He was always rushing, or I should say almost always rushing, but not always coming off the end. Sometimes he was in the middle. The pre-snap movement from the defense, to me, just quick glance, was really different than it was last year. And I go back to that word disruptive again. The first play from scrimmage is obviously pretty frustrating because they broke off a 54-yard broken tackle and run. But I look at the play and think, okay, Ohio State absolutely dominated the line of scrimmage on that play, and Steele Chambers didn't just run down Lorenzo Styles. He had the mental wherewithal to try to punch the ball out as he's chasing him. I mean, it was, for being a broken play, they managed to save the touchdown and then eventually, never let up a touchdown on that drive.
Yeah, and the thing that I noticed really the most just being down on the field was that, it seemed like there was gang tackles more than anything else. It wasn't just one guy coming to the ball. It was one guy getting to the ball and then everybody else coming and meeting him. Or if, one guy kind of, slowed him down, missed, then everybody else would be right there. So, you can just tell that there's so much more focus on fundamentals this offseason than just, doing your job the right way, putting yourself in the right position, and then good things happen from there.
How good was Tommy Eichenberg tonight? And then to stand back here, Tommy, come on, man. Swear a sport coat over a T-shirt. This is so uncomfortable for him. It's not his scene, and I give him so much credit for doing it because it's clearly not his thing, but he understands that it's part of the deal. If you're going to be a big name player at a program like this, people are going to want to talk to you, and you may not be comfortable. So props to him for doing it. But as soon as he walked in the room, there was a small, everybody kind of laughing like he's really wearing that. But of course he is. Tommy played really, really well tonight. Had a huge tackle in the first half that got everybody out of their seats. I continue to feel like he is now in a place where he's going to excel because he's that inside zone run linebacker where he can stuff a hole. He's not being asked to go cover a guy man to man.
Yeah, and I think that, it was kind of not necessarily a coincidence, but kind of fitting that they were honoring the 2002 national champions today, because I thought that, him out there in that 35 kind of reminded me of Matt Wilhelm back in 2002, So, it's kind of one of those things. He feels very comfortable with the role he's in, and you can just tell that his play is just feeding off of that. And I think that, he's in the right situation, like I had mentioned, the right position, and, then he's going to be able to play and just not have to worry about, maybe the outside noise or worry about, things that are out of his control. He just has to focus on where he's at. And, the Buckeyes defense, benefits from that.
Lathan Ransom was also another really important player tonight. Didn't see a ton of Josh Proctor. I thought Ronnie Hickman played fairly well. Steele Chambers, I thought, had a really solid game, and I liked what I saw from the defense. There's basically one way for me to sum up the defense on the night. They essentially had one bad drive where they ended up allowing a touchdown, and I thought they went too deep with their rotation. They played some guys who maybe weren't ready to see meaningful snaps. Now, could that truly be the case? Was it just a bad series? I guess that's possible. Notre Dame also benefited from a tremendously fortunate catch. I'm not going to take the skill component away from that catch, but there was certainly some luck involved. Laying on your back and having the ball kind of fall in your lap. Yeah, there's some luck involved there. But they scored and they took the lead, and they did it in a time where Ohio State's offense was just out of rhythm. Before we talk about the absence of Jackson Smith and Jigba and the clunkiness of the offense, from that point forward, after giving up that touchdown, Notre Dame punted every possession the rest of the night. And I thought for Ohio State to go basically pitch a second half shutout and give the offense the time it needed and the feeling that they didn't have to panic because you're only down 3 points. You're going to tie the game. That has to be, or take the lead. That has to be your mindset. The defense allowed the offense tonight to come back in the game.
Well, and that's what's kind of weird about it, knowing what happened last year.
Different.
It was really night and day. And I think that, when it came time for them to go on that, the go-ahead drive, it didn't seem like there was any necessarily urgency. They felt, there was plenty of time to do it. And then, once they got the lead on Xavier Johnson's touchdown, and then they, put it out of reach at that point with Mayan Williams, having 60 yards on that final drive, I think that they just kind of methodically said, you know what, we're just better than Notre Dame, and we can take it down the field and put this game away.
Ohio State's toughness, I thought, wore down Notre Dame late. Mm-hmm. The defensive effort tonight from the Irish was really admirable. I think it maybe even exceeded my expectations of them a little bit. They were better in coverage than I thought they'd be. They were about what I expected on the defensive line. They made it difficult for Ohio State to really move the line of scrimmage, but the Buckeye offensive line did more than enough to keep C.J. Stroud on his feet. Mm-hmm. There weren't a bunch of negative plays. The times where Ohio State was working behind the sticks were probably more their own doing than it was Notre Dame forcing that. Yeah. All in all, look, the offense was the furthest possible thing from anybody's mind when thinking about things that could go wrong in this game. The assumption was, they're gonna do what we know that they're capable of doing. And,
right.
Ryan Day just said, look, sometimes early in the year it's a little clunky.
Well, and I think too, he mentioned as well, like they just put so much emphasis and focus on being tough and, not being, basically the other team allowing them to just kind of dictate the game in the trenches. And I think that was a really a focal point today, just maybe for the rest of the season as well. Like they know that they can score 45 points a game, 40, 50, whatever. But it's these kind of games in this situation right here that's going to end up allowing them to, possibly beat Michigan down the road, beat Wisconsin, beat Iowa. Those are the teams that are going to, Notre Dame is very similar to them and all kinds of aspects. And I think that this, you're going to get 50 points against Arkansas State. You're going to get 50 points against Toledo. But that moment, in those games, you're going to need this kind of effort. And I think that, you had mentioned CJ, having time, but I also think that he's kind of grown up a lot too, where I think that he recognizes things a little bit more. You kind of saw him slip out of certain rushes and stuff and kind of recognize it right when it was happening and I extend plays. And I think that just talks to like his maturation.
You remember his first press conference after the first game of the year last year? He was so shy.
Yeah.
He was, he's a man. He stood up there, he answered questions, but there was like I don't want to call it nervousness, but like just an unfamiliarity with all of this. And I didn't even notice it necessarily today in what he said. I noticed it in his posture. There were times he was leaning on the podium. He was almost a little slouched over because he was relaxed.
Yeah.
Because this doesn't faze him anymore, being in this press conference room and answering tough questions. And I thought when Xavier Johnson, who all of a sudden finds himself in the spotlight today, and Xavier's clearly like, hey, man, I'm going to give you the best answer I can.
Yeah.
I hope that answered your question.
Yeah.
Here's what's going on in my head. I found Xavier almost leaning on CJ in that moment, like, hey, man, how am I supposed to handle this?
Yeah.
It was an incredible 360 for CJ. I'm really, really impressed with his maturity.
Well, and I think we've noticed that kind of in the spring, he was maybe cracking jokes with us at his media availabilities and like those kind of things. And then, I think it was very notable in that, CJ always starts out his press conferences and media availabilities with, want to give praise to God and so forth. And if you notice, Mike Hall did the same thing.
Yes, he did.
Xavier Johnson did the same thing. And, I'm not saying that takes away from their faith or anything like that, but I think that it just kind of speaks to the player that Ohio State recruits and has on their team. And then just, kind of the brotherhood that they have as well, where they can kind of lean on each other for those faith moments. And, Xavier Johnson gave all praise to God for catching the touchdown pass and, being able to carry him down the field in that moment. And I think that just, that they're all very like-minded and it's really cool to see.
I think, there was nothing disingenuous about it.
Oh, not at all.
But similar to Xavier, Mike Hall's not a guy that's been up here talking to folks after games either. And so in the same light, I think there's a little bit of leaning on their leader who was front and center.
I'd say, and they see what he does. So, if he's up there and he says, I want to give glory to God and this and that, like they're going to say the same thing because they want to follow his lead. And that's exactly, why he is a captain, why, people look to him and why, in a situation like today, they never worried because they knew what he had in store.
Okay. A couple of other big things offensively. I don't want to go any further without talking about Jackson in his absence. So if you were at home, you certainly caught this on the broadcast. If you were at the stadium, maybe you were just catching up. Jackson Smith and Jigba early in the game took what I thought was at first glance kind of a tough shot, and I was a little surprised they didn't review it for targeting. I looked at the replay. The defensive back clearly led with his shoulder, but he hit Smith and Jigba in a way that, his helmet went flying off, his body kind of was contorted. The first angle you couldn't really tell, and it just looked like it was a tough hit, and he got up a little, I don't want to say woozy, but he wasn't totally right. And we just all sort of thought when the helmet went flying off, that's what that was. Fast forward a few minutes later, it became obvious that it was actually his left leg that kind of got rolled up on that play. And you could kind of see him grabbing at his hamstring a little bit. He was on the exercise bike, clearly trying to figure out a way to just work through whatever that pain was. Finally, they put him back in the game. And I mean, no offense to Jackson, because he's an unbelievable player. He was a shell of himself. Mm-hmm. He just didn't have it. I hope the injury is not long-term. Ryan Day said afterward that they hope they're going to get him back this coming week. They'll do a little more evaluation tomorrow. I thought perhaps losing him and the inability early in the game to run the ball and move the line of scrimmage at will just kind of left everything a little flat.
Yeah. I mean, when you lose a key part of your offense, like, you're going to kind of struggle with that and say, if they game planned all week to make Jackson a significant part of the offense, and then you take him away, that's going to be difficult. But I think that, in the end, one, you're not going to necessarily need him against Arkansas State and Toledo the next 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So, just make sure he gets healthy. But at the same time, I think that it was important to see, Xavier step up, Marvin step up.
Jaden Ballard was the first one off the bench.
Yeah. So I think while it may have seemed a little wonky because he was missing, at the same time, it allowed CJ to get more comfortable with the other wide receivers because, he's mentioned dating back to, when they first came up and were on scout team together and they have that repertoire because of that, and then to take him away and say, okay, well, now I'm going to be able to rely on these other guys like that. That's just as important to me.
No Julian Fleming tonight, which I was a little confused by because, he was on the game day status report as a game time decision. We're standing in the south end zone before the game, and Julian was asked by somebody whose name I don't want to mention, but who you would think he would give a straight answer to. And he looked at that person and said, I'm all right. I'm good. And he went out there and warmed up. And so I sort of thought, okay, well, then Julian Fleming's going to play tonight. He finished his warm-ups, and then he never took the field. Okay. Emeka Egbuka, I thought, played really well. Mm-hmm. He didn't have too many unbelievable moments that we know he's capable of. The touchdown was a really nice play. He showed a good burst of speed to get away from two defenders and didn't shy away from contact when he went toward the pylon. It was a nice touchdown. But I think of the receiving group tonight, he's the one that stood out to me the most in thinking, okay, look, now with Jackson out of the game and no Chris and no Garrett from last year, let's see what this looks like. And Egbuka took his chance.
Yeah, and you kind of think that, just going into the season, it was going to be Jackson 1, Julian 2, Emeka 3, and then today it was really Emeka 1. So I think that, that only allows him to get more confident. And he obviously showed why he was a 5-star prospect, number 1 wide receiver in the country. So I think
his highlight film from high school is fun to watch.
Yeah. So it's just a matter of, getting him in there, getting him comfortable. And I think at some point, I did kind of think that Ohio State missed Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave a little bit because
they missed their 2 first-round wide receivers.
I think that and I've said this before, where I think that we kind of forget that they did lose 2 first-round wide receivers because for all the stuff that Jackson did in the Rose Bowl, I think that it was just kind of one of those stars aligning moments where he had Marvin step up and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, to lose 2 first-round wide receivers, that's not an easy thing. And we have to remember this was only game 1. There's so many times that, you come into game 1 and everything is a little bit off. You're still learning things. The crowd is there and so forth. And, CJ acknowledged that today. And I think that, just getting that out of the way, that's only beneficial.
I thought it was really important for this team to win a game that felt like a true team win early in the season. It wasn't just 1 or maybe 2 guys that carried the way. I think there's something to be said for trying to set the tone for a good year when you can do it in this way where, hey, it's going to take 60 minutes. You're trailing at halftime. They went 6 possessions in a row without scoring a point. I have to look it up. I saw a tweet. I wasn't sure if it was factually accurate or not, but it's been a long time since Ohio State has gone that many consecutive possessions with nothing. I'm not going to get too upset about Ruggles missing the field goal. Could it have been a bigger deal? Yes. Yeah. It happens. It was just a slight pull. It's not the end of the world, but obviously that's not good.
He got the miss out of the way early in the year.
I sure hope so.
The end of the year.
You know, his track record's pretty good, so I'm not gonna worry about that. But the running game, I think, deserves some attention here before we wrap up, because there were moments in the first half where you scroll through message boards or social media or talking amongst your family and friends watching the game, probably all yelling to each other, why are we not running the football? And Ryan Day was asked, actually, I thought Doug Lesmerises asked a great question at the end of this press conference where he basically said, look, Ryan, you have clearly demonstrated an unbelievable ability to throw the football during your time here. But given the way the end of the game went and your ability to run out the clock and punch in a couple of touchdowns, one was through the air, one was on the ground. Doug was basically asking Ryan, are you more satisfied in winning a game this way because sometimes you need to? And Day had a big smile on his face. Yes, I am. It's nice to throw it. It's nice to have those weapons. They've done it really well, but you got to be able to run the ball. And there were times early on it didn't look good, but by the end of the game, you look at the numbers and think, actually, those carries were split pretty evenly. Travion and Mayan picked up some really tough yards. They ran hard. They ran well.
Yeah, and I mean, since Day got here, they've been able to throw the ball like crazy. That's never been a concern. And it always has been, it's kind of popped up last year. It popped up in 2018 when Dwayne Haskins was a quarterback, and, they were going back and forth between J.K. Dobbins and Mike Weber. And it just seems like at moments there's like an aversion to maybe running the ball. Like they just maybe don't want to because they know that they can throw the ball. But I think that it was important for them to sit there and say, okay, well, we have to run the ball. Like there has to be a mindset to say we have to do this, because if we don't do this, then we're not going to be able to reach our goals, because, at some point it's going to bite us in the butt because we're not going to be able to do what we need to do.
Yeah. And again, I just think about that in the context of the defense did way more than what we were used to seeing in these kinds of situations the last 2 years. But in the small subset that is tonight, they did their job in not letting Notre Dame run away with it when they had some momentum. I'm not saying they never gave up first downs. They gave up a handful along the way over those few drives. But they just never let the Irish get to a point where they made Ohio State feel too nervous. And I think that was probably at the end of the game, Notre Dame will probably look back at that film and go, man, it was problematic for us because we could have done fill in the blank. We could have put that team, I'm talking with a couple of guys in the press box during the game, and it felt at times like Notre Dame was one more big play away, like they had at that first play of the game. They're one of those plays away from all of a sudden Ohio State fans are going, this isn't good.
It was very easily, in a situation where they could have been down 17-7.
Yeah.
In the third quarter, and you're kind of like, wait a minute, is this Oregon all over again, where they're just throwing the ball and trying to get back and coming up short. But yeah, I mean, I think that one thing I was really impressed with Tyler Buckner, Notre Dame's quarterback, especially just his dual threat ability. And I think that was something that will benefit Ohio State down the road, because really, there was a lot of times he'd be back there, looking like he was going to throw it and then just take off. And it's like, okay, well, then that speaks to what I was talking about just everybody kind of gang tackling and that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I mean, he was really impressive. And I think that, Notre Dame had a lot of chances, but I think that ultimately what hurt them is, just maybe not having the same talent at wide receiver, or just, really anybody outside of Michael Mayer to really throw the ball to. And I just think that, that ended up being why they couldn't keep up.
Buckner started the game 8 of 8 for like 128 yards. They weren't all really impressive passes. He threw a couple that were good. But I found myself admiring what Tommy Rees did offensively when Notre Dame was trying to move the ball between the tackles and rely on a very good offensive line, and it wasn't working. Yeah. And then it was, okay, let's get Tyler situated and get the ball out of his hands and throw a bunch of bubble screens or quick slants or whatever, get it to a skill position guy fast enough and get somebody in space. And that's where the Buckeye defense, they didn't struggle, but it, like, Notre Dame started to get a little bit of life. And obviously, when you hit that one other lucky catch, it put together a 87-yard drive and eventually scored.
Yeah, and I think that you made a really good point just about doing a lot of read options and then getting it out of his hands really quickly, because as a young guy, you want to take out the decision making in those kind of situations. And really, Ohio State was giving that to them. It wasn't like they were sitting there saying, we're trying to stop you and not being able to do it. They were really saying, you can throw it underneath all day if you want. You're just not going to beat us, over the top or anything like that.
Well, and when you double somebody like Michael Mayer, you're basically trusting the rest of your guys to handle their one-on-one assignments, or else you're in trouble. And unfortunately, there was one instance where that really was problematic. Mayer also fumbled and got lucky and fell right on top of a ball that could have squirmed any number of different ways. He might have had a much larger gain on that play if he didn't fumble. I know he's kind of, running laterally there, but still. All things considered, I thought Ohio State handled its assignments really well on both sides of the ball. They displayed the mental toughness that we really needed to see against a good opponent. I don't know if Notre Dame's top 5. I think Notre Dame, I said this on our podcast the other day, I think they're definitely better than 9 of the teams on their schedule. I think Ohio State is a better team, and I think the Buckeyes proved that tonight late in the game. And I think Notre Dame is capable of winning the other coin flip games on their schedule against a couple of good teams. Will they be a playoff caliber team? I'm not sure, but they were more than worthy of the hype around this game early in the year, and they gave Ohio State a really good test.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was moments where it kind of did feel like a playoff game
100%,
because it was very evenly matched in many different aspects. And I think that I was a little bit critical of Notre Dame early in the week, but I'll be the first to admit after that game that I do think they're very capable of winning 10 games. And if they could beat Clemson later in the year, like that's an opportunity for them to get back in the playoff picture. And who knows, maybe this could be a matchup in the first round of the playoff again.
Very, very possible. That's for sure. So that's our instant analysis here from Ohio Stadium. It was an extremely fun day that started early this morning with College Game Day in town. Perhaps you saw it on social media. Reese Davis, right before he starts hosting the show, turns around to a couple thousand fans that had gathered for College Game Day, and he said, "You think some big TV contract's going to keep us off the banks of the Olentangy? Hell no!" And the place went nuts, and it sort of set the tone for, look, I know ESPN and the Big Ten are not partners after this year, but there is clearly still a passion on the national scene that ESPN says they're not going to ignore. Money matters for sure, and this is a fan base that supports their team and loves the national spotlight. There's a reason College Game Day has been covering Buckeye games for so long.
I mean, I definitely think, and we kind of saw it in what Corso said when he donned the Brutus Buckeye headgear, like, dating back to 1996 when Ohio State was his first pick with the headgear, Brutus has a soft spot in his heart, and I think that
he wasn't picking the Irish today.
Not at all, even though he is Catholic, like he said. But I mean, I think that it's a matter of, one, there's just a passionate fan base here that would love to have him back, regardless of what some occasional people might say on social media. But at the same time, they know that, like, that's a way for them to make money too, is to say, okay, well, we're coming, to Ohio State as much as we can because we can, and that's going to help us. So, I mean, even though ESPN isn't going to have the game, they're still going to have a presence here. So, it's just a matter of, you pick a different channel to watch it on. It's not that big of a deal.
Ryan Day, he didn't say it. He didn't have to, because his actions spoke plenty loud enough. When I was over at Game Day this morning, and he was kind of quote unquote backstage getting ready to be called up to go sit on their second stage, I suppose, outside and talk with the Game Day crew. Coach Day had his phone out, and he was videoing what was going on, because even he wanted to be able to look back on it and say, man, this is pretty cool.
Yeah, so I think that and that's kind of interesting too, because earlier in the week he kind of said, He's not going to be able to, take in the moment. And I think maybe that kind of made him say,
it wasn't a long video, but he did take it in.
I think that maybe that's just something that, somebody brought that up with him and he says, you know what, maybe I do need to bring, to take this in, because it's not often, this is literally the first time that we've ever had, Ohio State play a top 5 opponent, be in the top 5 themselves and play the season opener. So, it's kind of one of those things you really just have to take it in.
I'm going to ask Jim Knowles this question this week. This will be the final thought as we wrap up. Jim Knowles is such a serious dude. And by the way, because they checked off every box, his like stoic nature is 2 thumbs up. I'm going to ask him this week, like, what brings him joy? What is fun in this for him? Because he made comments about, I'm happy for the players or whatever, but like, I just don't see him smile a whole lot. Yeah. And his defense was worth smiling over tonight.
Well, I kind of want to ask him, who is the real Jim Knowles? Because is it the guy who is, with his hat down like this, not really wanting to talk to us, early in the spring and in the fall, or is he the guy who's cracking jokes? It's like a matter of him just being comfortable with it, and it makes me wonder if just moving forward, is this the Jim Knowles we're going to get, or is he just maybe at the beginning of every year kind of going to be that gruff, I don't want to talk kind of guy, and then once he feels comfortable with the defense, then he'll let his true self show.
And there was something certainly to be said for, hey, I know I'm in a big role. We're just going to go out and prove it and let the work do the talking for us. The Buckeyes certainly did that today. 21-10. You can find all the stats online if you're interested. Look at some of the numbers. None of them were particularly gaudy. Neither running back for Ohio State ran for 100 yards. CJ threw for just over 200. But the Buckeyes didn't turn it over. And when they had to find a way to get it done late, they could lean on their offense. The defense carried the day through some tough times. A very, very impressive season-opening win as Ohio State gets ready for 2 lesser opponents the next couple weeks before they'll host Wisconsin. For Andrew Lind, I'm Brendan Gulick. All the latest that you need is over on BuckeyesNow.com. Andrew's going to have some really cool photos from tonight posted, so certainly want to check those out. If you missed Coach Day's press conference, that's available on our YouTube channel over on Buckeyes Now on YouTube, and follow all the content you need over on Buckeyes Now on SI, on all of our social channels, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. All right. Did you have something else?
Yeah. Don't forget, the polls do not come out tomorrow. The polls do not come out until Tuesday, because there's Florida State and LSU on Sunday, and we have Clemson and Georgia Tech on Monday. So just wanted to make sure y'all were aware when you check Buckeyes Now at noon tomorrow and don't see that.
I'm very interested to see how the voters are going to look at this Ohio State team, judging what Alabama did today to a much lesser opponent. I'll be interested to see how much more national respect Ohio State garners. Do they get more respect because their defense played well? Are they dinged at all for not having a great offensive showing? Looking forward to seeing that for sure. The reality is this team is off to a great start, and certainly with an early season win that they couldn't find last year against that non-conference team, they are in a better spot already here in 2022. Again, for Andrew Lind, I'm Brendan Gulick. Thanks for tuning in to Buckeye Breakdown, our instant analysis post-game show after the Buckeyes beat the Notre Dame Fighting Irish 21-10 to kick off the 100th season here at Ohio Stadium. We'll see you real soon. Buckeye Breakdown continues on Monday morning. We'll get some upon further review thoughts, tell you what we learned about this game after having a chance to kind of dive into it, and then we'll turn our attention to Arkansas State on Tuesday. We'll see you soon, everybody. Go Bucks. Have a great weekend.